Hi, I'm Venitra. For years, I helped my family behind the scenes, paid their mortgage, covered their mistakes, never asked for credit. Then one day, I opened my laptop and found a fundraiser with my face on it. They said I abandoned them. But what if I told you they faked my signature to steal my house, rewrote my story at their anniversary party, and praised my company online, without realizing it was mine? What happens when your own family erases you, not with anger, but with applause? Would you still stay at the table, or would you finally walk away? I was halfway through reviewing a valuation report for a family-owned hotel in Galveston when the receptionist buzzed in. "Your dad's here," she said, her voice careful. "He looks intense." I froze, pen in midair. My father had never once stepped foot into my office. Not for a tour, not for a hello, not even during the grand opening 3 years ago. "Send him in," I said, masking the flicker of alarm in my voice. The door swung open harder than necessary. He didn't wait to be invited. My mother followed behind him, quiet, lips pursed. And then Delphina, always a beat behind, always ready with a rehearsed smirk. None of them looked at me like they were happy to see me. No hugs, no greetings, just entitlement, wrapped in perfume and pressed slacks. Dad moved straight to my desk, like he owned the place, and slapped down a stack of printed papers. I didn't even need to look at them. I already knew. "You have millions," he snapped, "and you let us struggle?" It was like a switch had been flipped. My brain stalled for a second, trying to process what I'd just heard. "What are you?" Delphina cut me off, voice dripping with sweet condescension. She left her laptop open when I was over last week. I wasn't snooping. I just needed a charger, and it popped open. "I thought you'd want to know." My mother, calm and controlled as always, placed a hand on my dad's forearm. "How long, honey?" she asked. "How long have you been keeping this from us?" There was something rehearsed in her voice, like they'd practiced this little ambush in the car ride over. I looked from one face to the next, the air in the room starting to compress. This wasn't a concerned family. This was a boardroom coup. I picked up the top page. Account summaries, investment returns, tax documents. They had been digging. Dad cleared his throat and leaned in. "I want 10 million set aside for your sister. That's just for starters. A vacation home in Florida. We all need somewhere to get away. And I'm ready to retire. Effective immediately." I blinked. Not once. Twice. Still, the words didn't change. "I'm sorry. What?" "You heard me," he barked. "This is what family does. You didn't get here alone, Venitra. You wouldn't be anything without the foundation we gave you." I straightened in my chair, setting the papers down carefully. "Dad, where's this even coming from? You—" He raised his voice again. "Don't make this about philosophy. It's math. You made it. Now it's our turn." Delphina sat down finally, legs crossed, looking completely at ease. She gave me that sideways glance that used to make my skin crawl when we were teenagers. "You were always so good at pretending to be humble." It was cute. "But now we know," Mother added. "We're not asking for everything. Just what's fair." I inhaled slowly, felt my fingertips graze the edge of the desk. Cold. Hard. Still mine. "I built this," I said softly, firmly. "Alone," Dad scoffed. "You weren't supposed to build it without us." The office fell silent. Even Delphina had nothing to add to that. They didn't come to thank me. They came to collect. That much was clear. I wanted to say something, anything, that would reset the room, bring it back to sanity. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. They were staring at me like I owed them oxygen. I didn't answer them that day, not because I couldn't, but because I realized there was nothing I could say that would change how they saw me. I watched them leave my office like they'd just filed a tax return. Cold. Transactional. Like I was a vault that finally coughed up enough to be worth their time. Later that night, after the office had emptied out, I sat in the break room with a cup of stale coffee and silence thick enough to bite. That meeting dug up a memory I'd tried to bury under years of work and polite avoidance. It was a dinner years ago. I was 27 and halfway through building my firm, back when I had clients but still answered my own phone. Delphina had just dropped out of graduate school for the second time, blaming a toxic professor and misaligned vibes. My parents were stressed. Something about tuition payments and maxed out cards. We were at Olive Garden, cheap wine, reheated breadsticks, and family tension disguised as polite conversation. I remember putting down my fork and clearing my throat. I've been working with small businesses, managing a few accounts. I could help. Financially, I mean. There was a pause. The kind that carries more weight than shouting. Dad chuckled. We don't need advice from someone still figuring out what they do. Marilee tilted her head like she was about to defend me, then glanced at Dad and backed off. Idara looked up from her phone, smirked. We're fine. You just focus on your side gigs. That phrase stuck like tar on my skin. Side gigs. They didn't reject my offer. Rejection implies I had a place at the table to begin with. No, they dismissed it. Me. Like I was playing dress-up in the real world. What stung wasn't the refusal. It was the certainty in their voices that I couldn't possibly be of value. Months later, I found out they'd borrowed $40,000 from a man at church, someone who helped people find the right financial fit. Turned out he was a slick-talking real estate broker who funneled people into high-risk loans. I didn't hear about it directly. I pieced it together while helping Mom organize documents for tax season. His business card was tucked behind a stack of unpaid bills. The loan documents were printed on thin, curling paper. Adjustable rates, early balloon clause, predatory terms written in font so small it was practically fine print's evil cousin. I didn't confront them. I just quietly shredded old receipts and added family boundaries to the same mental file where I kept expired warranties. From that point on, I stopped offering, not out of spite, out of survival. I told myself they meant well, that they didn't know better, that one day they'd see what I'd built. And if not, well, I'd still have the business. Work became my insulation. I answered emails at midnight, took meetings over lunch. I over-delivered on everything because at least in business, results mattered more than bloodlines. But that dinner, that shrug, that was the blueprint for every interaction that followed. They didn't want help. They wanted to keep the story intact. Delphina, the hopeful creative who just needed time to bloom. Idara, the dependable older sister who did things the right way. And me? The ambitious one who made them uncomfortable. So I played the role. I clapped when Delphina launched yet another Etsy shop. I nodded when Idara complained about being undervalued at work. I listened, and I stayed quiet. Until now. Because now, I'm sitting in the very office they stepped into like they owned it, remembering how it all began with a tossed-away offer over dry pasta and fake smiles. They said I let them struggle, but no one ever asked how I learned to survive. That memory lingered in the back of my throat as I finished locking up the office. I drove home in silence that night. No radio, no podcast, just the hum of tires and the hum that lives behind your eyes when you've been reminded you're still not part of their definition of we. It reminded me of another time they showed me exactly where I stood. Not through yelling, not through arguments, but through something much quieter, dismissal disguised as celebration. It was 2 years ago, Marilee's 60th birthday. They threw a backyard party, the kind that pretends to be casual, but has printed menus and linen napkins. I paid for most of it, quietly, through one of her church friends who handled the catering. I didn't want credit, I just wanted to honor her. I had spent 6 months searching for the perfect gift. I remembered when I was 15, flipping through a vintage fashion magazine with her, and she paused on a page, an article about a 1940s Cartier brooch, shaped like a dove with tiny emerald eyes. She whispered, "Now that's timeless." So I hunted. Auctions, private sellers, emails that started with "good afternoon" and ended in 5-figure quotes. Eventually, I found one. Not identical, but close enough that I knew she'd recognize it. The gift was small, velvet box, navy blue. I waited until most of the guests had eaten, and she was sipping her second glass of white wine before I handed it to her. She opened it slowly, tilted her head, smiled with confusion. "Oh, it's cute," she said, holding it up between two fingers. "Looks like something from that flea market you used to love." Delphina cackled. "Maybe next time go with something from Nordstrom, not nostalgia." Someone else chuckled. "I don't remember who." "Doesn't matter." Marilee moved on, setting the brooch, still in its box, on a side table next to half-eaten cake and a crumpled napkin. She thanked the neighbor for a scented candle 10 minutes later, called it just divine. I didn't mention the price, or the paperwork, or that the brooch had been authenticated and insured. I didn't say it cost more than the backyard tent. I didn't say it reminded me of a moment when she once saw something beautiful and claimed it with awe. I left it there. Later that night, while helping carry dishes inside, I saw it again, now on a ceramic dish by the sink, untouched, still half-wrapped. I didn't reclaim it that night. That came later, quietly, like most of my damage control. 6 months later, I had it appraised and sold it at auction, $24,000. The buyer wrote that it was an excellent historical piece, elegantly preserved. I smiled at the irony, but what stayed with me wasn't the money. It was the message. It wasn't just that they didn't like the gift. It was that they couldn't believe it came from me. To them, anything I gave had to be either performative or accidental. There was no room in their story for me to be thoughtful, only strategic, cold, self-serving. That brooch became a symbol, not of luxury, but of how tightly they held their image of me, how unwilling they were to update the version of me they'd agreed upon long ago. After that, I started keeping notes. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed record, because their version of reality was always louder than mine, and I needed something to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. They called it dramatic. "She always kept score," Marilee once whispered to a cousin. No, I didn't keep score. I kept proof. Because when someone shows you, again and again, that they're not willing to see you, it stops being hurtful. It becomes data. She thought it was worthless, I told myself, because I gave it. You can't force someone to value what they've already decided doesn't matter, and you can't teach someone to recognize gold if they're committed to thinking you only deal in plastic. That brooch was never about jewelry. It was about history. I didn't need the brooch to remind me of how invisible I was. The house was enough. About a year before that office ambush, my parents were on the brink of losing their home in Bastrop. Some refinancing scheme had gone sideways. The bank had stopped being patient. The tone of the calls changed. I heard it in Mom's voice, tight, measured. She never asked directly, but I saw what was coming. I stepped in before the foreclosure notice could arrive. Quietly. I created a holding company, negotiated with the bank, bought the property outright, and let them believe a miracle had happened. A favor from one of Dad's old connections, he'd said to his buddies at the VFW. We moved them into a small 2-story colonial in San Marcos, white shutters, a creaky porch swing, and a lemon tree out back that had seen better days. Delphina posted a video tour titled Our Family Home, Restored with Love. She panned the camera dramatically across the living room. "This place has history," she said, as if she hadn't just picked it up from Zillow a month earlier. Mom went a different route. To her church friends, the house had been an unexpected blessing. She'd smile and say, "When God closes a door, he opens a mortgage." I stayed silent. They threw a housewarming party. I stood near the buffet table, holding a plate I never ate from, watching Wendell tell a neighbor, "Got a great deal, knew the guy from my days at the mill." I felt my throat tighten, not from pain, but from restraint. That house cost me $432,000. They hadn't put in a dime. Still, they walked around as if their sacrifice had earned every brick. I kept the deed in my office vault, along with a folder labeled Contingencies. Not out of paranoia, just habit. One Sunday, a few months later, during dinner, Wendell picked at his meatloaf and said, "It's strange. The bank never sends me any statements for the house." Delphina didn't miss a beat. Maybe the house just loves us enough to pay itself. They laughed. Mom chuckled in that way she always did, when she was trying to diffuse something sharp. I didn't say a word. I sipped my wine and nodded as if amused. But something settled in me that night. Not rage. Not even disappointment. Just an internal click. Like a drawer closing. They didn't ask because they didn't want to know. Acknowledging what I did would mean they owed me something, even if it was just honesty. And in our family, gratitude was often mistaken for weakness. So I let them play house. Let them decorate. Let them take photos on the porch as if it were some generational relic passed down with love. All while I paid the property taxes, managed the maintenance quietly through a service account, and ensured everything stayed afloat behind the scenes. I learned to stop expecting acknowledgement. Instead, I created my own paper trail. Copies of payments, bank transfers, service invoices, all neatly filed away. Not because I planned to use them, just because when people rewrite history often enough, the truth becomes a lifeline. Mom once said, "Some things are better left unsaid." But sometimes silence isn't grace, it's strategy. And while they lived in that house, like it had always been theirs, I began planning for the day they'd forget who opened the door in the first place. Monday slid into Sunday, before I realized I hadn't responded to anyone in the family group chat. That wasn't unusual. They weren't exactly hanging on my every emoji. I mostly skimmed the photos, the forwarded prayer chains, and the passive-aggressive digs wrapped in quotes about forgiveness and family being everything. That morning, the coffee was still brewing when my phone buzzed again. It was a group message, Delphina, posing at a networking brunch, captioned, "She's going places." Of course she was. Places sponsored by my money, my silence, and my erasure. I didn't react. I just tapped the screen, let it fade. Then another message popped up. Not in the group, direct. From my mother. "Don't discuss money in front of her. She'll get emotional. Just go through Dad." I stared at the screen. No punctuation, no hesitation, just strategy. Within seconds, the message disappeared, unsent. But not before I screenshot it. My fingers moved without thinking, saved to my folder, emailed to myself. Subject line, "Truth, date stamped." It wasn't the first time they'd talked around me, but it was the first time I caught them in the act. I remember once, on Delphina's birthday, they surprised her with a new car. A used hybrid with a bow slapped on the hood. They handed me the camera and said, "You're so low maintenance. That's why we never worry about you." I smiled, took the photo, played along. That was the deal. But this text wasn't about carelessness. It was coordination. They weren't protecting my feelings. They were plotting how to bypass me. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I didn't ask who else knew. I just sat there, phone in hand, while the coffee burned my tongue. No one had ever actually called me unstable, but they never called me steady either. I was always the one they managed, smiled through. By the time Sunday dinner rolled around, I had already decided I would go, not to argue, not to perform, just to watch. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and leftover roast. Marilee greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, but her eyes flicked past me, already scanning the casserole in the oven. Dad didn't look up from the television. Delphina was on her phone in the corner, fake laughing at something on Instagram. We sat around the table like actors reading a script we'd grown tired of. I answered when spoken to, but never offered anything more than needed. I was taking notes. Who made eye contact? Who didn't? Who asked if work was going well? And who shifted the conversation the moment I answered? When I got up to grab water, I caught the end of a whisper. "Well, she always has been difficult." I didn't turn around. After dinner, I walked out without saying goodbye. No one called after me. No one noticed the file I had begun building. In my Google Drive, under Personal, I created a folder labeled Documentation just in case. Inside it, I dropped the screenshot. A copy of the email to myself. A brief description of the dinner. Names, dates, tone, reactions. Some people journal, I document. Because if you're going to rewrite history, I'll make sure the footnotes survive. They didn't say I was unbalanced. They said I was inconvenient. I wasn't angry. I was expected. That's the thing no one tells you about being excluded. It stops stinging when you see it coming. By the time I finished organizing that folder, night had settled over Austin. I washed my coffee mug, turned off the overhead lights in my apartment, and let silence press in like a weighted blanket. I didn't know it then, but that same night, while I was tucking away receipts and truths, Delphina was opening something that didn't belong to her. It happened 2 weeks before the office confrontation. She had stopped by my condo under the usual flimsy excuse. "I'm meeting a podcast guest nearby," she said, all smiles and fake urgency. "Mind if I borrow your charger for a sec? My phone's at 5%, and I need to find the cafe." I waved her in. Stupid, I know. But after a lifetime of being accused of being cold, you start letting your guard down just enough to keep from confirming their narrative. She made a beeline for my office. I didn't follow. I trusted that my laptop was locked. I hadn't realized I'd left it open after reviewing client reports earlier. 15 minutes. That's all she needed. Later that night, I was brushing my teeth when I got a notification. "Your MacBook was accessed at 4:27 p.m. I paused. My stomach tightened. Not in fear, but recognition. I opened the system log, opened files. Account summary, Q1, PDF. Quarterly holdings, FY master. Sticky note app. Asset, 22.4 miles, updated. It was all there. My entire financial footprint, sitting open like an unlocked diary. Every account I had worked years to build. Every contract I had negotiated. Every number they were never meant to see. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Delphina posted a story on her socials, one of those cryptic slides with pastel background and passive shade. It read, "Some people play small just to keep you from asking big questions. No tags, no context. Just enough venom to make sure I knew she had found something and was already writing the story her way." I didn't engage. That weekend, I got a message in the family group chat. "Dinner Sunday, hope to see everyone." I showed up. Not because I was ready, because I was done playing defense. The moment I walked in, I knew. Dad was at the head of the table with a manila folder in front of him. Merrily wore her Sunday best, though it wasn't Sunday, and Delphina sat poised like she was waiting for a show to begin. No one offered me a seat. "Venitra," Dad said, tapping the folder. "We figured it out." I didn't respond. Delphina crossed her legs and smiled. "You're doing well, like, really well," Mom chimed in, all faux concern. "Why didn't you tell us? Why keep something like that hidden?" I sat down slowly. Measured. Not because I was rattled, but because I refused to let them dictate the tempo. "You went through my files," I said evenly. Delphina leaned forward. "Technically, the laptop was open, and you let me borrow your charger." Wendell added, "That's not the point. The point is, you've got more than any of us imagined, and we're your family. We've supported you since day one." I almost laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. Supported? "You didn't come to ask," I said. "You came to take." No one corrected me. They weren't ashamed of the breach. They were furious that they hadn't found more. I stood up. "You don't get to invade someone's world and call it discovery." Delphina opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For once, I didn't slam the door when I left. That would have been too loud for the kind of lesson I was delivering. I just closed it, quietly, firmly, finally. 3 days passed. I didn't respond to texts, didn't open my email. I stayed in motion, client meetings, audits, 3 back-to-back Zoom calls, and let the busyness keep me from feeling much of anything. Then a message came. Not from Delphina or Mom this time, but Dad. One line. "Let's talk like grown-ups. Sunday, 6 p.m. Rudy's Diner. No, please. No apology. Just a command posing as an invitation." I almost ignored it. But some part of me, maybe the same part that still left a seat open at every milestone dinner, agreed to go. Not out of hope, out of closure. Rudy's was barely half full when I arrived. Faded booths, laminated menus, the familiar scent of fried onions and burned coffee. I slid into the corner booth, ordered tea, waited. They showed up 5 minutes late. Wendell first, then Delphina, then Marilee. No one smiled. Dad placed a thick envelope on the table like it was a contract closing. "We've had a lawyer draft something fair," he said, sliding it toward me. I didn't touch it. "Just look at it," Delphina pushed. "You'll see it's reasonable." I opened it, skimmed the first page. A family trust. They wanted $10 million transferred to a fund. Delphina listed as co-manager of my firm's public image strategy. I was demoted to silent partner, like they could retroactively rewrite my ownership. I placed the folder back on the table, flat. No. Wendell didn't blink. "You're doing this to your family?" I met his stare. "No. I did something for myself. You're the ones trying to erase it." Then it happened. He stood so fast the ketchup bottle toppled over. His voice, once gruff, now booming. "We built you," he barked. "You wouldn't have gotten a damn inch without us." A fork clattered to the floor 2 booths over. Heads turned. "You walk around like you invented the damn wheel, but we made you. You lived under my roof, ate my food, and now what? Act like we're strangers? Like we're beggars at your door?" Marilee's hand reached for his arm. "Honey, please." He yanked it away. "We should have cut you off at 16. You were always ungrateful, always acting like you were better." The diner froze. A teenager 2 tables over lifted her phone, pretending to scroll, but angling the camera just enough. I stood, not in a rush, not rattled, just done. "You made this about money," I said, keeping my voice even. "I didn't." Delphina looked up, her face pale now. "Ven," I shook my head. "No, you don't get to cry now." Then I turned and walked out, left the tea untouched, the paper untouched, and 3 stunned faces behind me. 2 days later, the video was everywhere. "Local man explodes at daughter over hidden fortune," clips spliced with angry comments. A few people recognized my name from Forbes. Some sided with him. Most didn't. But I never gave my version. I didn't need to. Because when you lose your voice around people long enough, you learn something rare. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It means strategy. The video storm hadn't even settled when the next blow landed. It was Monday morning. I had just wrapped up a client call and was sipping on a cup of burnt office coffee when my cell rang. Unknown number. Normally, I let those go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Ms. Venitra Cole?" the voice asked, clipped and professional. "This is Nathan with Chase Risk Management. We're calling to confirm the collateral loan finalized in your name last Thursday." I stood up from my chair without realizing it. "I'm sorry, what?" He repeated it slowly, as if maybe I just hadn't caught the words the first time. "We're confirming the $58,000 loan against the property at 319 Belgrove. Paperwork was processed and finalized last Thursday." My breath caught. That was the San Marcos house, the one I still legally owned through the holding company, the one my parents lived in, rent-free. "I didn't apply for a loan," I said, my voice cold now. "Send me everything." After hanging up, I stared out the office window for a full minute. That kind of anger isn't hot. It's glacial. It doesn't burn. It freezes you, makes everything slow and sharp and clear. 15 minutes later, the email landed. Loan documents, signatures, scanned IDs. I opened the PDF and scrolled to page 9. There it was. My signature, slanted and smooth. Except it wasn't mine. I knew the difference. I don't loop my R's like that. And I certainly don't use a pen with that color ink. My mind snapped to a day about a month ago. Marilee had stopped by the office, unannounced, holding a lemon pound cake and smiling like she hadn't just told the entire family I was impossible to read. She said she was in the area, just wanted to see the place again. I'd let her in for 10 minutes, gave her a quick tour, left her alone at my desk while I grabbed coffee from the break room. My printer had been on. My signature pad was plugged in. It wasn't even a clever theft. Just lazy, entitled. I forwarded the file to my attorney with a short note. That is not my signature. Please initiate a hold on all associated property transfers and begin protective filings. No theatrics, just facts. That afternoon, I drove to the house. Not to confront. To confirm. Marilee was in the garden, pruning a sad row of hydrangeas. I stepped out of the car, and she looked up like she hadn't seen me in years. "Venitra," she said brightly. "What a surprise." "I got a call from the bank," I said flatly. Her face didn't fall. It hardened. "Oh, that. It was just to help with some property taxes. You weren't using the equity anyway. And we thought—" Why, that word again. "You forged my name," I said. No accusation, just truth. She adjusted her gloves, didn't meet my eyes. "It's not like we took anything. We were protecting the home." I nodded once. "You just taught me something very useful." I turned and walked back to the car. That night, my attorney froze the holding company's account, initiated an investigation, locked down the deed. They weren't just living in a house I bought. They were mortgaging it behind my back. No phone calls came, no apologies, just silence that confirmed everything. People think betrayal looks like a knife. Sometimes, it looks like your own name signed in ink you never held. I didn't go home after the confrontation with Marilee. I didn't need to. I drove straight to the office, unlocked the side door with my keycard, and sat at my desk in the dark. The only light in the room came from the monitor as it booted up. I opened my banking dashboard. A familiar screen. Transfers. Schedules. The neat little line that had moved $5,000, like clockwork, every first of the month for the last 5 years, into an account labeled WM Household. I stared at it. 5 years of pretending I didn't notice the overdraft protection requests, the bounced utilities I quietly paid off, the extra transfers by accident when I knew exactly where the money was going. They never once asked where it came from. I imagine they assumed it was leftover from some long-forgotten inheritance. Aunt Gwen, maybe, or a settlement they didn't think to question. But deep down, I think they knew, and chose not to ask. I hovered over the line marked active. "You cannot be the emergency fund and the scapegoat," I whispered aloud. Click. The screen asked for confirmation. I gave it. And just like that, I stopped financing my own erasure. The fallout didn't take long. That Saturday, Wendell left a voicemail that crackled like static. "There's something wrong with the account. The mortgage didn't pull. Call me." No greeting, no closing, just assumption. Monday morning, Marilee texted, "Sweetheart, is everything okay?" The autopay bounced, just checking in. I didn't answer. Tuesday, Delphina posted a selfie with a caption, "Some people only love you when the money flows." She didn't tag me. She didn't have to. I screenshot it, filed it in my folder. Documentation, post-withdrawal. No need for confrontation when you've got records. By Wednesday, the calls started coming from numbers I didn't recognize. Cousins, old neighbors, even a woman I hadn't spoken to since high school, who apparently heard something serious was happening in the family. They always lead with concern, but the undertone was clear. How could you cut them off now? "They're saying it's during a medical issue," one message read. I typed a response. "My name was forged on a legal document. That's not a family crisis, that's a felony." I deleted it. Instead, I called my lawyer and asked her to begin drafting a cease and desist. Harassment, defamation, unauthorized use of my identity. I wasn't playing banker anymore. Let them explain the missing mortgage payment to the lender. Let them tell their church group how the miracle house they bragged about was being paid for by the daughter they kept calling ungrateful. I stopped explaining, because the second you start explaining your boundaries, someone will always try to move them. When people are used to your help in silence, the quiet after you stop sounds cruel. But it's not. It's just the first sound they've heard that wasn't serving them. They called it abandonment. I called it a budget cut. It was just past 6:30 a.m. when the first text came in, a screenshot from Claire, a colleague I hadn't spoken to in months. Then 2 more, then 6. Each message carried the same link, same headline: Help our family heal. After betrayal by our own. At first, I thought it was spam. Some generic scam wrapped in pastel fonts and pity language. Then I saw the organizer's name at the bottom. Delphina. I clicked. There it was. My name, tucked neatly into paragraph 3. Not directly, of course. Just enough innuendo to avoid defamation on paper while dragging me across the digital pavement. After years of being quietly supported, our family has been left abandoned during an unexpected medical crisis. Our youngest sibling has done everything to keep us afloat, while one of us, with means beyond measure, has chosen silence over compassion. One of us. No need to say it. They knew who they were pointing at, and the photo, God, the photo. It was a cropped image from a vacation over a decade ago. I was standing beside a palm tree, arms folded, mid-blink. I looked tired, detached, unapproachable. The kind of photo someone would use if they wanted the world to believe you were the villain. The campaign goal was $200,000. Within 3 hours, they had raised $11,000. I scrolled through the comments. How can someone be so heartless? I don't care how much money you have. Family is family. She looks like she thinks she's better than everyone. Each sentence landed like a cold slap. I didn't cry. I took a breath, opened a blank document, and titled it, Digital Defamation Archive. Then I took screenshots, every paragraph, every donation, every profile connected to the campaign. And then I called my lawyer. Copyright infringement, misrepresentation, public use of personal image without consent, I said. She didn't ask questions, just said, already downloading the source. By lunch, we'd submitted a formal takedown request to the GoFundMe platform and issued a cease and desist letter addressed to Delphina by name. That night, I composed a memo to my staff. If any client references the story circulating online, please direct them to legal. Do not engage personally. Do not speculate. Thank you for your discretion. I didn't post anything publicly. No rebuttal. No side-by-side image correction. No curated quote about truth rising eventually. Because in a world so hungry for sides, silence doesn't just stand out. It unsettles. They thought painting me as cold would warm the public to their version. They didn't expect that I had spent years building a reputation stronger than a caption. A few of my clients emailed anyway, short, supportive. One simply said, "We know who you are." And that, more than anything, reminded me why I never needed a defense committee. They didn't just take from me, I wrote in my notes. They rebranded me. In this world, reputation is currency, and they tried to bankrupt mine. But unlike money, reputation doesn't disappear when stolen. It waits, it collects receipts, it builds case files. And I was done letting their story sit uncontested. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be documented. The cease and desist had been delivered. The fundraiser came down 3 days later. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement. The silence was predictable by then, like clockwork. And still, I showed up to their 40th anniversary party. It was held in the church hall behind the same chapel I hadn't stepped foot in since college. Cream plastic tablecloths, mismatched chairs, centerpieces made from silk roses and silver spray paint. I helped secure the venue through a quiet phone call with Pastor Ray's secretary. They never asked how the deposit was paid. Of course not. They assumed, like always, it just worked out. I wasn't there for them. I was there for the record. There were dozens of guests, old family friends, distant cousins, a few faces I hadn't seen since the days when I still sat at the kids' table. Everyone dressed their best. Wendell wore a navy suit that strained at the shoulders, Marilee in blush pink, pearls at her collar. They looked presentable, like the kind of couple that others aspired to be, if you didn't know what lived behind the closed doors. I arrived late on purpose. I didn't want the greetings, I wanted the distance. During the slideshow, I stood near the back of the room. Pictures flashed on the wall, weddings, birthdays, cookouts, trips to Galveston, baby showers. I saw myself twice, once at age 12, holding a plastic trophy, the other in the background of a Christmas photo, barely lit. No college graduation, no ribbon cutting for my office building, no awards ceremony where I gave a keynote speech that was later quoted in Business Weekly. Blurred, forgotten, cut out like I'd never existed. But I stayed, because someone had to. Idara took the mic to give a toast. She always had the voice for it, measured, confident, pleasant, without ever sounding warm. "Thank you all for being here," she began, and the room hushed. She ran through family highlights, the hard-working ethic of Wendell, the grace and poise of Marilee. She mentioned the house. "Thanks to Dad's old friends and Delphina's perseverance, we have the beautiful home we all share today." I blinked, slow. My jaw didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. I simply shifted my weight from one heel to the other and let the weight of the moment settle. Then came the final line. "Some of us have moved away, done our own thing, but it's the ones who stayed who carried this family." The room clapped, loud and long. I didn't. Marilee pulled Idara in for a hug, as if she had just accepted an award on her behalf. She whispered something into her ear, then kissed her cheek. Later that night, after leaving the party without saying goodbye, I sat in my living room with the lights off and opened my laptop. I created a new file in my archive. Timeline of contributions, undisclosed support, annotated, dates, amounts, receipts, screenshots, bank statements, a full record of the years I'd poured into a family that had decided to rewrite the plot without me. At the top of the document, I typed, "This isn't for them to remember. It's for me to never forget." Because being erased in public is a different kind of grief. It's quiet. It doesn't leave bruises. It leaves questions. From others. From yourself. They say not all thefts are about money. Some are about memory. The next day, sometime around mid-morning, I received a screenshot from my friend Kelsey. She didn't send a message, just the image. She didn't need to. It was a Facebook post from Marilee. The caption read, "Wow! Incredible women out there these days. The firm sounds so trustworthy." Attached was a link to a Forbes article titled, "10 Female CEOs Disrupting Traditional Wealth Management in America." I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or just sit still. There was no photo of me in the article, just the company's name. My company. The quote underneath, "We don't sell safety, we certify truth." I remembered writing that line. I was 29, sitting on a twin-sized mattress in my first real apartment. The space had no furniture yet, just boxes, ambition, and the distinct smell of burnt toast. I'd scribbled those words on a napkin while eating dollar ramen straight from the pot. Now they were published on a national platform, and my mother had shared them like they were some fascinating discovery she'd made on her morning scroll. I didn't reply to Kelsey. There wasn't anything to say. A few hours later, I checked the comment thread out of curiosity. Delphina had chimed in. "I've heard of this firm. Clients swear by them." Someone else replied, "That's the kind of place I want to intern at after graduation." Then a cousin, well-meaning as always, wrote, "This reminds me of the path Venitra took." Marilee responded, "Oh honey, this is a whole different level. This woman runs an empire." And there it was. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel sadness. Just clarity. A sense of stillness, like when a storm passes and you're left staring at the wet ground, wondering how it all got so loud and quiet at the same time. I closed the app. Later that evening, after I got home and changed out of my work clothes, I poured myself a glass of wine and pulled the article up again, this time on my desktop. I printed it, trimmed the edges, pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Not as a trophy, as a mirror. They didn't know I was behind the work they admired. And somehow, that made the recognition cleaner, purer. No strings, no family performance. Just a moment where the world acknowledged something I built, and they praised it only because they didn't know it belonged to me. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. I didn't need them to see me anymore. They already had. They just didn't know it. Earlier that week, they clapped for Delfina's staged tears. Now they clapped for a nameless woman they didn't realize was already seated at their table. It was like watching people admire a building while refusing to admit who poured the concrete. The difference is, I remember every brick. I built it. Every contract signed when no one thought I could close. Every rejection I turned into leverage. Every 3 a.m. spreadsheet marathon I did alone while they were posting filtered selfies with captions like, "Grind never stops." They loved the house. They just never thought I could be the architect. So no, I didn't send the article to them. I didn't comment on the thread. I didn't correct Marilee's assumption that it was another woman altogether. They'd already forgotten me once. This time, I let them. Because I'd rather be underestimated in silence than seen through a distorted lens that flattens what I've survived. And funny enough, the world didn't need my last name to recognize the value. That was enough. It was a Thursday, halfway through a quarterly review meeting, when my phone buzzed on the polished mahogany conference table. Normally, I would have ignored it. Meetings were sacred ground, especially ones involving investors. But there was something about the second vibration, hesitant, deliberate, that made me glance down. A message from Claire. Claire had interned with us 2 summers ago. Smart. Curious. The kind of intern you quietly wish you could clone. We hadn't spoken since she'd left for her MBA, so the message was unexpected. Her text was short. "Hey, is this your sister speaking?" Attached was a video file, just under 2 minutes long. I didn't open it immediately. I waited until I was home, after dinner, after I'd cleared the dishwasher and powered down my inbox. That's how I handle stress. Structure first, emotion later. I sat on the couch, bare feet pressed into the hardwood floor, a glass of lemon water by my side, and I hit play. The screen blinked to life. There she was, Delfina, my younger sister, center stage, blonde hair perfectly curled, microphone in hand like it belonged there. Behind her, an LED backdrop shimmered. Women in business, rise and redefine. She began softly, her voice calculated but tremulous. "There are some wounds that don't bleed." The audience hushed. It was a line designed to echo, and it did. Growing up under someone who weaponized success, I learned to survive emotional neglect. My chest didn't tighten. It didn't crack. It did something stranger. It settled, like a ship's anchor hitting sea floor. I already knew where this was going. She didn't name me, of course. Delfina's too clever for that. But every syllable was a scalpel, quiet, strategic, and meant for me. I wasn't the golden child. I was the collateral. Applause swelled. A few people in the audience gasped. Others nodded with visible sympathy. Her delivery was perfect, measured, intimate. She placed a hand on her chest. A rehearsed gesture. The kind of thing you pick up in media coaching. "Some people build empires," she said, eyes scanning the audience like a preacher surveying a congregation, "and forget who carried the bricks." They loved her. Of course they did. She rapped with a crescendo of emotional resolve. I turned pain into purpose. The crowd erupted. Within an hour, that clip had hit social media like wildfire on dry brush. Hashtags bloomed in every corner of the internet. She survived, toxic sisters, truth tellers. And the caption on the viral post? Delfina, raw, brave, survivor. I stared at it all. The comments, the retweets, the article excerpts from blogs I'd never heard of. It was like watching someone else's obituary, except I wasn't dead. I was just the villain in someone else's story. She's so powerful. This story shattered me. She's speaking her truth, finally. No one paused to ask for context. No one wondered about my side. Because they weren't interested in the truth. They wanted a story, and Delfina had given them one. Polished, packaged, market-tested heartbreak. I didn't respond, didn't post, didn't call. Instead, I logged into my encrypted drive, navigated to the folder titled Digital Reputational Risk, and created a new subfolder. Tier 2. Public media. I downloaded the video, took screenshots of every relevant tweet, made notes on which brands, influencers, and publications had liked or shared the content. And then I picked up the phone. My brand consultant answered on the second ring. "We need to talk mitigation," I said. He paused. "On a scale of 1 to blackout?" I said calmly. "She's rewriting me, in real time." That night, I drafted a formal legal statement for review. Not for release, yet. But I wanted to be ready. At this time, we will not be commenting on any third-party subjective accounts not grounded in verified fact. Our focus remains on continued integrity and client trust. I read it aloud once, nodded to myself, and moved on. The next morning, I met with my legal team. I updated my estate plan. I removed Delphina from every document. Medical directives, emergency contacts, powers of attorney. Not out of anger, out of clarity. She'd made her position clear, and I responded in kind. She didn't destroy me, she sharpened me. If you shout loud enough, people cheer, even if what you're saying isn't true. But truth? Truth doesn't chase the mic. Truth endures. Let them take the applause. Let them pass judgment. Let them write hashtags on sand. Because the real things, the facts, the archives, the legacy, live beneath that noise. In the end, they took everything but the truth. And I still had that. It was just after 6 p.m. on a Monday when I pulled into the driveway. The sky was already beginning to dim, a soft winter dusk settling over the street, headlights from passing cars cutting through the stillness. I had just wrapped up a client meeting, the kind that doesn't drain you because of the workload, but because of the performance. 2 straight hours of navigating skepticism so refined, it almost felt like politeness. The kind of meeting where every sentence is an uphill climb until suddenly, about halfway through, they realize you actually know exactly what you're talking about, and everything shifts, not in words, but in posture, in tone. You can feel it. By then, though, you're already tired. I killed the engine, grabbed my bag, and made the familiar walk to the front door. On the way, I stopped at the mailbox. Bills, flyers, a magazine I never subscribed to, and one envelope that made me pause mid-step. Cream-colored, thick, real stationery, the kind that whispers importance before you even see what's inside. Hand-addressed in a slanted, flowing cursive that tugged something in my memory. No return address. But I didn't need one. I stood in my kitchen, my coat still on, briefcase still at my side, turning that envelope over in my hands. I knew that handwriting. It had been years, but I'd know it anywhere. And Selma, my mother's older sister, the one who never raised her voice, never interfered, never got in the middle of anything. She was always there, but quietly. Too quietly. She attended events, sent gifts, asked careful questions that didn't lead to hard answers. Always present, but rarely engaged. She didn't pick sides, she picked distance. Or so I'd thought, until now. I opened the envelope with care, breaking the seal as if it might contain something living. Inside were 2 pages. Handwritten, blue ink, each line evenly spaced, like she'd written a draft first and copied it slowly, deliberately, onto the final version. I sat at the kitchen counter and read. I watched you grow, quiet, exact, careful not to need too much. The first line hit me like oxygen in a sealed room. I had to set the letter down for a second, just to breathe. I saw them take and take. I said nothing. I thought you needed silence, not defense. But I was wrong. You didn't need silence. You needed someone to say, "I see you." My eyes stung. Not with tears, exactly. Just that heat you feel when something gets past your armor. She wrote about birthdays forgotten, about holidays I hosted, but went unthanked for. She mentioned the Thanksgiving I catered when Mom's back was out, the baby shower I paid for when Rachel couldn't afford it and didn't get invited to. She remembered the way my name was spoken at family gatherings, not with pride or curiosity, but with vague discomfort, like I was a shadow at the edge of the picture frame. And then she wrote a sentence I'll never forget. "You didn't stop loving them. You just stopped letting them write your name in pencil." That line. God. I read it again and again until it stopped feeling like just a sentence and started feeling like something had shifted inside me. Like something that had been tight for too long had finally let go. And Selma didn't apologize. Not exactly. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't offer justification for her years of silence. And that's what made it powerful. She wasn't performing. She was confessing. Not out of guilt, but out of recognition. She didn't rush to explain. She just told the truth. And sometimes that's more sacred than any apology could ever be. When I finished, I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time, staring at the floor. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. There was no sadness, not really. Just that slow, heavy exhale that comes when something you've carried for a long time suddenly becomes a little lighter, even if only by an ounce or two. I didn't call her. I didn't text. There wasn't a number in the envelope, and I took that as a sign. If she wanted thanks, she would have left a way to reach her. But she didn't want thanks. She wanted to witness, to say, "I saw it. I saw you." And that was enough. I took the letter upstairs to my office and opened the drawer marked "Private, Not Legal." It was where I kept the things that weren't quite evidence, but were still real. Memory fragments. Unofficial truths. I placed the letter gently inside. Before I closed the drawer, I grabbed a Post-it, scribbled a quick note, and stuck it on the envelope. I was seen, once, and that was enough. Because not every wound needs fixing. Some just need acknowledgement. Some pains aren't about resolution. They're about recognition. Some stories don't need to be rewritten. They just need to be told out loud by someone who didn't look away. And Selma hadn't defended me when I needed it most. She hadn't corrected anyone at those dinners when they told my story with me edited out. She hadn't spoken up when silence was the safest currency in the room, but she wrote it down. And that felt louder than any defense ever could have. Maybe healing doesn't come from the person who caused the injury. Maybe it comes from someone else entirely. Someone who saw the wound and didn't pretend it wasn't there. Someone who looked at the truth and didn't flinch. Maybe healing isn't always dramatic. Maybe it's quiet. A letter, a sentence. A moment where someone tells you, you weren't difficult, you weren't selfish, you weren't invisible, you were just misnamed. And maybe, just maybe, that's all I ever needed. The letter from Anselma stayed on my desk for 2 full days before I touched it again. Not because I was avoiding it. Not because it unsettled me. In fact, quite the opposite. It was a still point, an anchor. Just knowing it existed was enough. I didn't reread it. I didn't need to. Every word had already etched itself into some internal surface I hadn't known was still tender. Because that's what it did. It witnessed me. Not the curated version. Not the misremembered version filtered through family lore. But the real version. The one who held her breath through years of silence. Who bit her tongue until it blistered just to keep the peace. The one who, until that letter, had accepted the rewritten narrative as an unspoken cost of survival. And Selma's letter didn't change history. It didn't make it all okay, but it did something I didn't realize I'd been waiting for. It shifted something foundational. And once it shifted, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. So, on Friday morning, with the city still waking and the light just starting to creep across the hardwood floors, I made a call. I spoke to the title company that handled the property in San Marcos, asked if the transfer paperwork could be done digitally. They said yes. I told them to prepare everything. No drama, no ceremony, just closure, quiet and complete. By noon, the documents were signed, witnessed, and notarized. No back and forth, no negotiation. The deed was officially transferred. The house in San Marcos, the one I had bought, furnished, and quietly financed, while letting others claim ownership, was no longer mine. The drive there felt different this time. No tension in my shoulders, no rehearsing conversations in my head. Just the hum of the engine and a surprising calm I hadn't expected. When I pulled into the familiar gravel driveway, I noticed something small but telling. The porch light was on. It was mid-afternoon, and the sun was high, but the porch light was still burning. A habit Marilee never managed to break, always leaving it on, as if someone might forget where to find their way back. They weren't home yet. I entered through the side door, using the key I still carried. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and whatever they'd had for dinner the night before. Pasta, probably. Something easy. I stood in the space for a moment, letting the silence stretch. I moved through the house like a visitor in a museum of a life I no longer lived. My fingers brushed over the back of the old couch, upholstered on my dime, never mentioned. Still holding its shape. The family photo from their first day in our dream home, still hung by the stairs. Taken the day after I closed on the mortgage. I wasn't in it. I didn't touch anything, didn't move a single frame or fold a throw blanket. I just walked to the kitchen island and set down a sealed envelope. Inside, the property transfer documents, a letter, typed, signed, the only remaining key. The letter was brief, no embellishment, just finality. No lien, no rent, no future contact. You can stay. But the debt, financial, emotional, legal, is closed permanently. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a boundary, written in ink instead of breathless arguments. I walked to the front door. Stopped, not because I was second-guessing, but because, for once, I wanted to feel the moment. To acknowledge that I was leaving not out of bitterness, but with clarity. A kind of clean goodbye. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. That sound, that simple, satisfying click, echoed louder than all the slammed doors that had ever come before it. As I walked to the edge of the driveway, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. Wendell's car, right on time. Marilee sat in the front seat, posture tight, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Delphina was in the back, phone in hand, scrolling like the world was a stage, and she was its only narrator. They saw me. I didn't stop. Wendell pulled the car to a slow halt. He stepped out and opened his mouth, maybe to ask, maybe to beg. I raised one hand, palm out. "There's a key on the table," I said. "I'm not taking it back." Delphina looked confused, like the moment wasn't aligning with whatever story she'd been telling herself. She blinked, hesitated, then said nothing. Marilee didn't even meet my eyes, just gripped her purse like someone had told her to hold on for dear life. Wendell looked past me, to the house. He didn't say a word. I turned and walked away. No explanations, no performance. Some people expect a monologue when you walk away from the mess. I didn't owe them one. I didn't want applause. I didn't need understanding. I just wanted space that didn't require justification. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the storage facility on South Lamar. The air smelled like cardboard and concrete and sun-baked metal. The manager gave me a quiet nod when I showed him my ID. I signed in and took the dolly back to Unit 34B. One box. That's all that was left. Taped carefully shut, labeled in my handwriting, Grandma Marie, Estate. I wheeled it out, loaded it into the back seat, and drove home. Once inside, I placed it gently in the middle of my living room floor. When I cut the tape and opened the flaps, I was hit by the scent of lavender sachets and old paper. It was like she had just been there, breathing her steady breath into everything. Inside, photo albums with worn corners, letters in delicate cursive, my original birth certificate, still in its envelope, a small jewelry box, wrapped in tissue paper. Inside that box was the brooch I had bought for Marilee years ago. Still polished, still perfect, still untouched. I didn't cry. I placed everything into my personal safe, locked the dial. That was the final thread, snipped. Not in anger, not in grief, but in peace. They still lived in that house. But they would never again live inside any version of me. Some families live in houses. Some families live in stories. Mine used to live inside me. But now I live elsewhere. The week after I closed the safe on what was left of my family, I found myself sitting in a cafe just off Congress Avenue. It was a space I wouldn't have picked a year ago. Too curated, too self-aware in its design. Every detail screamed aesthetic. Reclaimed wood tables, Edison bulbs dangling like overthought metaphors, pour-over coffee served on wooden trays. But that morning, I didn't care. The light was warm, the coffee strong, and I needed neither permission nor pretense to be there. I sat near the window, the kind that invites observation rather than reflection. Outside, the world moved easily. People crossed streets, clutched coffees, adjusted scarves against the late winter breeze. They smiled at one another, paused at crosswalks, checked their phones with a kind of casual urgency that only comes when you assume life will keep unfolding predictably. I opened my laptop, not out of necessity, but out of muscle memory. Work didn't demand me in that moment, but I let the screen glow to life anyway. Tabs blinked open, invoices awaiting approval, partnership proposals, editorial pieces referencing my last keynote. My company, my work, my actual tangible life. Proof that even if no one clapped, I had built something worth standing in. Across the room, a man in his late 50s sat with a young woman. His daughter, it seemed. They were sharing a plate of roast chicken. She was talking with animated hands, and he was listening the way people rarely do, without checking his phone, without planning his next sentence. Just listening. There was pride in his expression, not performative, not self-congratulatory, just real, steady, present. I didn't eavesdrop, but I caught fragments. He remembered the name of her supervisor, asked about a project she had mentioned 3 weeks prior. She laughed at something he said and leaned forward without noticing. It was intimacy without agenda, and watching it didn't make me sad, but it did make me remember. It took me back to another table, years ago. The first Sunday dinner after I'd signed my first official client. I arrived early, freshly pressed dress, bottle of Malbec in hand. Too expensive for my budget at the time, but I wanted to mark the occasion. I took the seat next to Delphina, who didn't look up from her phone once the entire meal. Marilee was busy praising our cousin Idara's new HR job. Wendell launched into one of his usual stories about something I'd heard him say before, nearly word for word. No one asked how my business was going. No one asked anything at all. Not even a polite "how's work?" Rachel had just passed her driver's test that week and received a standing ovation. I smiled through it all, not because I didn't notice, but because I did, and I knew no amount of success would ever matter in a room where I was never truly seen. I spent years trying to matter in rooms that had already finalized the seating chart before I even arrived. Eventually, I learned to leave those rooms. Not in anger, not in dramatic exits or grand confrontations, just in quiet refusal. Refusal to shrink, refusal to contort, refusal to prove. I closed my laptop gently and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying that distinct stillness of late winter. Cool but not biting, a kind of pause before the bloom. It felt like a season waiting to exhale. I walked without purpose, letting instinct guide me a few blocks down to a brownstone tucked behind a row of trees. My new office. It wasn't tall. It didn't tower or shout. No flashy signs, no street-facing glass. Just a clean, warm space with one polished brass nameplate inside the lobby. Venitra & Co. Private authentications and estate services. No fanfare, just truth. As I stepped inside, one of our interns passed me in the hall. She was young, all quiet ambition, and barely contained excitement. "Morning, Ms. Venitra," she smiled. "Just read your quote in Business and Balance. Really hit me." I smiled back, steady. "It wasn't a quote. It was my whole life." She blinked, uncertain how to respond. But she didn't need to. Some truths don't ask for validation. They just land where they're meant to. I didn't tell her what had been taken from me. I never do. Because healing, the real kind, doesn't require you to put your pain on display. It doesn't come from retelling the wound over and over again, waiting for someone to say you were right to feel it. Healing is quieter than that. It's sacred. It's personal. It's choosing to honor the scar, not to relive the blade. Later that day, I took the long way home. As I drove, habit pulled me into a familiar detour, past the old neighborhood. I didn't plan it. My hands just turned the wheel. The streets looked the same, but something inside me didn't. Through the trees, I saw the roofline of the San Marcos house. The shutters had been painted a new color. Marilee's once obsessive garden now looked half wild, the hedges overgrown. A new car was parked in the driveway. Delfina's, probably. The license plate frame read, "Boss Babe." I didn't feel regret or nostalgia. I felt confirmation. That chapter had closed. I thought briefly of the time, age 33, when they made me sit at the kids' table again during a family reunion because there weren't enough chairs. No one blinked. No one protested. They just assumed I'd go along with it. I did. That time. But inside, something began to rupture. And now? Now I could laugh at it. Not because it was funny, but because I had finally built a life big enough that their table didn't even register on my map anymore. I didn't get revenge. I got clarity. I didn't win a fight. I built a life. I didn't get justice. I got peace. And peace? Peace is far more dangerous than rage, because peace is sustainable. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't burn out. Closure isn't always a slammed door or a monologue shouted from a burning bridge. Sometimes closure is just the quiet decision to stop waiting for someone else to open a door that you're perfectly capable of walking away from. The day I stopped playing my part in their story was the day I stopped being rewritten. They didn't clap when I left, but the silence didn't follow me either. Because now, every room I walk into, I walk in whole. They don't know who I became, but I do, and that's more than enough.